everybody. Welcome. Sorry we're a few minutes late getting started. Thank you all for coming out on a nice Saturday. Really wonderful to have Tony give this talk here. Just FYI, there are catalogs for this exhibition, and Tony's here, so if you get a catalog, he can sign it for you. Give a very special dedication. So please, if you think about getting one of those, now's the time. A lot of artists here, and we love that so much. I'm not going to point everybody out. Thank you for coming. That's what this place is for and what it's about. I don't have to do much of an introduction for Tony. I think everybody's very familiar with him. So I'm just going to turn it over to you, and good luck.
Okay. You could put the light on. Yeah. So I'm not sure I need this. Maybe I will. Let me know. Yeah? Okay. All right. So thank you all for coming. It's fantastic. I didn't expect more than about 10, but that's great. I'd like to acknowledge that we're on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. I'd like to thank Paul and the gallery team for putting this on, and to Laura Levesque and Marzi Farker, who were my studio assistants. So this, I see many of your faces, people who have actually walked around the show and read all the labels and know what this is. I see others who probably have come in cold. Especially, I have a friend who's come in from Ontario for this hour, Mark, and he hasn't had time. So, I would like to leave some of the meaning to you going around the walls after, but I'd like to explain more about the way the art was produced, and I will explain quite a few of the texts. So, in case you don't know, this is the floral emblems of resistance movements throughout the world and throughout time. So I became curious as to why such a fleeting, ethereal, delicate symbol would represent such tough resistance movements. That was the start of why I became curious. And I ended up with a show that is not a political soapbox. This is about the phenomenon of delicate flowers representing resistance against brutal regimes. This is what I thought they would have. You know, this is the symbol that I expected. But it turns out that I read a paper by Erin Chenoweth, a Harvard paper from 2011, that said that in every case, peaceful protests have won out over armed conflicts. In 2011, that was true. It turned out to be a year later, it wasn't quite true. But she also posited that there's a 3.5% rule, that if more than 3.5% of the population resist, then some change does occur. And it was true then. A year later, Bahrain happened, and 6% of the population were protesting and nothing happened. So it turned out to be not quite true after she published the paper. This is Bahrain. So there were two inspirations for actually thinking of this as art. I was in Tel Aviv in 2016 and came across Taryn Simon's show called Paperwork and the Will of the Capital. And it seemed to be just very attractive photographs of flower arrangements, 7 foot by 6 foot 6. And then I discovered that, inspired by things like this, that she had taken the table settings during treaties and accords being signed. So famous treaties. She found the photographs of the table and reconstructed them. So She amassed 4,000 flowers in the studio. She found, by the way, that many had morphed over the years of becoming popular cut flowers. They no longer looked much like they did the time before. But anyway, you can imagine, this really fed my love for meaning and art. It's like they stand on their own. Paul's always said this, it's got to stand on its own. But then suddenly there's all this magic that happens when you see the meaning behind. And so I'd like to read something from Diamond. She wrote 2 weeks ago in the Saturday Evening Post that comes out, Saturday Evening Post that comes out of this gallery. And she talked about I'll read it to you. In much of post-war and contemporary art, there is a collapse of the binary. And by binary, she was talking about the move from the 60s conceptual ideas being the art to those with a sensory aesthetic focus. And so she says, creating a rich relationship where embodied presence and intellectual idea coalesce within single works and practices. Such works create a feedback loop. The immediate experience triggers conceptual reflections, and the conceptual framing deepens the physical and emotional impact. So this precisely sums up my show. As far as I could, I wanted them to stand with quality and craft in realism and have this extra powerful thing. As soon as you realize, I would love to see people walking around the show without knowing in this and then discovering it. But I would say that during this, because some of my work is conceptual and minimalist, I wanted to say that there was a feeling that was always anti-aesthetic, and I kind of disagree. This art was Solowitz, the art being the sentence, and the idea that there's a generative result that needn't be by him. So the sentence is literally the art. And what's on the wall there is beautiful. And quite a lot of that work came out to be some of the most powerful in the 20th century. And so for me, I think that there was an awful lot of aesthetic thoughts behind what the art was. So the other inspiration, the first one was Terence Simon. The other inspiration was I started Googling floral emblems in resistance movements and came across the White Rose movement of 1942 during the Nazi war, obviously, and these were students in Munich, and they started writing graffiti and distributing pamphlets. This is Sophie Scholl and her brother Hans, and they had, the three of them at first were Christoph Probst, the third one. It expanded to be one of their professors, and then in other universities they had managed to spread the word. But what happened is that Sophie was at the top of the stairwell in the university in Munich and had one pamphlet left in her suitcase. So she lifted it out, popped it over the edge of the stairwell, and the janitor saw her and told the Gestapo. And 4 days later, the three of them, Sophie, Hans, and Probst, were executed by guillotine. Somehow or other, that got me. I know, obviously really brave and also really naive to go against Hitler, but it got me going. I started a much more deep dive into resistance movements with floral emblems. But I started, just to explain the process then, I took the idea of the White Rose, and this was the first idea I had, was to use the materiality of the canvas, this being hot rolled steel, that on the floor is concrete. There are many different versions where the metal or the darkness represents the regime that they're fighting against. So this one had the idea that the movement's fleeting, that the roses are proportionately on the canvas, if you like, in a very strange way. They're almost like they're flying by and you happen to catch two of them, almost like a film or something. And so the White Rose, you can see that they're like photographs resting on the canvas. The blue part there is like a piece of paper, but then there's gravitas from the oil painting. So, and the pink was related to blood. So the idea was that they represented the fleeting nature of this movement. The second one that came out of the studio was a white rose that came from the blue, sunny blue, looking at the black regime. And I was very pleased with this. In fact, it's very interesting that some of the paintings just evolved as I went. I ended up with some other ones with a large black area and thought, maybe this one could do this. Because I became really interested in the black rose. The black rose seemed to be the most powerful emblem of any flower. It's a very, very strong thing. So I had there the black and the white rose. The black rose came from the Black Anarchist movement that was an American movement still that deals with prisoner rights and many other things. It also is the Black Rose Publishing House, which deals with a lot of left-wing dignitaries, publishing Chomsky and people like that. Then I thought about accessibility. These things take a while to paint, and I was thinking, okay, what if I just produced a print of 5? And so I bought a rose, waited for it to get exactly the right level of blooming, and took a picture. And these are roses, white roses on a hot-rolled steel, a photograph of hot-rolled steel that was in my office. If you notice, a lot of Andy Warhol's duplicates are just the same thing identically portrayed. This one has a bit of a flip because it just looked a bit boring. It suddenly looked magical when I mirrored some of them. And then I did the same in a much larger one it's around the corner here. It's backlit in a frame. There were two paintings that didn't make the cut in here. And interestingly, there were 2 of the first 3 that came out of the studio. This is the other one. It wasn't so much that they weren't up to the level, it's just that Paul turned out to be extraordinary, masterful in arranging a show. He wanted sparsity, and I initially thought, well, I'm going to have a lot to say where things are, and of course I left it to Paul in the end completely. And he put the wall behind you had one more. It had the black and the white rose, and neither of us were really happy. It looked like Stanley Park on a Sunday afternoon. It was like different things. And he took just one away, and it turned into a magical wall. So all credit to Paul. This is painted on galvanized steel. And actually the middle went from steel to white to gray to blue to white. Some of them had quite a lot of redoing. These ones, again, obviously black rose. I wanted the feeling of looking behind your left shoulder and being worried that someone was going to realize who you are and book you like the janitor. So that's a mystical person who's kind of in the shadows. And that one too, this was actually a photograph. Everyone asks who that is. It was actually a photograph of Laura in my studio, and I got her to shake her head as fast as she could, and then I added the white streaks as if it's in a train. So I did become obsessed with black roses, but I also became obsessed with the peacock flower. The peacock flower was it was ingested by enslaved pregnant women for 200 years in the Americas. They did not want to bring children into their world. The slave owners wanted to increase their workforce probably by having the slaves have children. And so the women, apparently a secret for that long, would ingest this. And I'm sure it was very toxic, but they miscarried. This was an early, particularly one of my favorites. And that's the real color of the peacock flower. It's quite extraordinary. And here the peacock flower is hidden behind the metal. I also painted a 12-foot rod, which is now hanging in the corner there. The idea was that one side is painted with a peacock flower, but to represent the fact that it's a hidden thing, I had envisaged it being 3 foot off the ground, and all you would see is a rod aluminum solid rod, 12 foot long, and the flower was underneath. And there'd be a small mirror on the floor, and you'd figure it out that the painting was on the underside. It turned out to be taking up too much real estate, and it didn't work. So I suggested hanging it vertically, and it took on a different meaning, and I love it. It's suspended a few inches off the floor, and it did work in the end. I credit Marzi for coming up with the blue and green background to these. And she started painting the first 3 inches, and I said, no, I'm doing this one. And so I painted the 12-foot rod and also the daisy rod, so that was a lot of fun. There are many other flowers that were emblems that I didn't choose to paint, so I'm going to tell you a few. There's the wild lily of Taiwan, and see where this is. It's in 1990, the student movement in Taiwan. There's the sunflower student movement in 2014. The Dutch had the daisies, that first one you saw, towards the end of World War II. And then there's the Rose Revolution in Georgia ending the Soviet rule in 2003, and it goes on and on. There's so many. And so I want to talk not about the background, the story behind the resistance now, but provide a few insights into how these were created. So this is the Persian iris. It's a symbol of tolerance and so on that's gone back many years and used as a symbol of resistance. But it's painted on base 64. Base 64, most of you now know because I've been doing this for a while. It's the code through which a photograph goes through the internet. So you take a photograph, the computer turns it into numbers and letters, thousands of them, and comes out the other end as a photograph. And I discovered this when I got about a 30-page text on the end of my email that was all this, and I thought, oh, I love this, what is it? It turned out to be base 64, and the image was corrupt, and I got the 30 pages instead. So what I've done is I've laser etched the image into gloss acrylic, so they're indented, and then I painted gesso over it, and then rubbed it all off, and what's left is all the gesso in the holes. And so that becomes the base 64 background onto which the iris is painted. This is the fig, the Iranian fig, that apparently strangles its host, and that's a symbol of the theocratic authoritarianism. And so this one was a struggle for me. I nearly didn't bother after it kind of got this far. And then I decided to paint gloss lacquer over it, and it suddenly looked like an old master. I painted 3 or 4 coats of gloss lacquer after that, and it had a special feeling that it didn't have before. A lot of these are painted on boards. This one is. In the end, oil on canvas was the preferred route to go. It was the right thing, and I should have listened to 3,000 years of art history and not bothered to do anything else. This one's a bit blurred, unfortunately. I wanted to explain what went on with this. I didn't put this in the catalogue, so I thought it was too pretty. But in the end, it's strong in that it represents the corrugated shoring that the trenches were made of. You know, the sides were bolstered by that, but I made it in copper instead of some nasty material. And so I'd had a previous work of art that was all folded copper, and it was hell dealing with the people who were making it. So I bought a brake, which I don't know if you know what that is. You put a piece of steel or metal in and you break it, and then you turn it around and you break it again, and breaking meaning folding. So I bought this folding machine for metal and did that. I did actually 3 others, and that was what I wanted. These are the lily of the valley, and so that represents the corrugation, and so does that on the right. So nearly all of the fields are acrylic, and all of the flowers are oil. You can paint oil on acrylic, obviously, but you can't do the other way around. And I found that oils were amazing for blending. You could just blend so easily. It's actually much simpler than you'd imagine. I bet you wouldn't imagine. That, by the way, was a very early photograph taken at the time of the First World War, taken from it. I also, there's someone in the audience liked this one most, and it was because I think she's a painter and her painting is quite 3D. And so I've got the character of the carnations, which was the Portuguese movement towards democracy in 2014, I think. The carnations have physical relief, and it's that with a light on it that creates the shadow that creates the petals. That was the idea behind that one. So I was getting, after doing the pretty one, I decided I needed to have everything a bit grittier. So I started with the base 64 matte acrylic panels with very, very fine, as a contrast, very fine base 64 etching. And then I painted these black roses on top of those, and then painted the frame around. I realized that if I could critique what I've done here, there's an opportunity in art, in painting, to have the painting process be the creative process. And if you think of abstract expressionists, let's say Joan Mitchell or someone, she's splashing paint around and it's becoming the art. And so what this tends to be is more documentation of an idea. So the creativity came more before than in the painting of it. But I wanted to read a passage from a novel I wrote that was about this, and I think it would be poignant to see what I mean. So this is set in 1933, and apologies to anyone who came to my book launch, because I think I read this then too, but one more time. So this is about the feeling of painting. Sophie squeezes a full 2 inches of rich black from the lead tube onto her palette, avoiding for no real reason any blemish on the white Sennelier label. She isn't mixing it so much as turning her brush through the pigmented oil to allow for an even amount to spread within the length of the bristles, inhaling the linseed and filling her mind and body with the smell and all it stands for. The bristles swell with the brilliant, moist paint, and she lifts as thick a dab as she dares without any excess falling. It is a spiritual move, harking to the altar of the Louvre and the history of art from its masters. It brings her close to Matisse and Picasso as they, too, move the same Sennelier oils around their own palettes within a few miles from where she sits, perhaps even at that very moment. The blank white canvas awaits her first stroke, its purity about to be shockingly altered by the simple movement of her hand. There, she goes beyond the point of no return, and this piece has begun. A vertical black brushstroke, 5 centimeters across, glistens and runs down the left side of the meter square canvas and pushes right across to the other side before it reaches the bottom. It is as if the brush decides where to go. The paint loses traction and streaks the surface, revealing waft and weave in its wake. It is such a bold and exhilarating thing to do, mixing excitement and desire with all the tension of a potentially less than perfect stroke. In that event, she would have to prepare the canvas with 2 coats each of shellac and white primer all over again, a week-long process instigated by 2 seconds of an imperfect move. And it would never quite have that virgin gleam again. The relationship between paint and canvas is in her command, but at the same time she seeks for it to come from somewhere else. Somewhere, not even in her own subconscious, but from a part of the zeitgeist that is the state of leading-edge art. It is as if she could channel this without being from that place herself. She flattens the paint on the canvas, marries their differences and the flatness of the hard-edged dry canvas with the alive, squishy, pigmented oil, half liquid and half solid. The paint flattens out and becomes black against white, no longer soft. In time, it oxidizes and hardens to the canvas and becomes one. The linseed from flax melts into the flax of the linen stretched across the wooden slats. It becomes many things at the same time. A painting in context of time and place, a work of art, a commodity, a release, a fling, a sated desire, and an emotional, historic, and spiritual link to its counterparts across the world. It is at best, if Sophie is lucky that evening, an absolute wonder. If it is really good, it will likely adorn her wall, perhaps for the rest of her life. And if it is brilliant, in those few strokes, and she can replicate its strength, it may adorn a public gallery past this century. But her only hope right now is that she'll like it as much in the morning. So this was heavily inspired by Theaster-Gates. Theaster-Gates, I saw a show at White Cube. I think Charlotte did too. Stunning. This is grittier and fantastic. It's three-dimensional. It's made of roofing material and tar, and those are kind of stars impregnated in. This was kind of what I was hoping to get to with my art and didn't in the show. It was very much more of a documentation, as I said. And this sold for $581,000. So on to other materials. This is the Ukrainian sunflower and the concretes that Russia. And it also happens to be the official emblem of the women's suffragette movement in the States. And someone also reminded me that there's this Taiwanese sunflower movement from 2014, I think. It was very interesting painting concrete. I have a Ukrainian woman in my office, and she reminded me that it isn't concrete, but hot rolled, but steel that was the main product of Ukraine. So I painted one on hot rolled steel. I painted dead sunflowers because I wanted to vary the show and show that this thing is all fleeting, and they became silhouettes. Onto the one piece that was from 2020, actually. This is a musical composition or change of someone's music. And this is the visual accompaniment. I wanted to play you a few minutes of the music, and it turned out the last minute it wasn't working. So it is on around the corner, and if you have the 14 and a half hours to spare, you can actually listen to the whole thing. It's Shostakovich's 10th Symphony slowed down 10.3 times so that it's 872 minutes long. And the 872 minutes relates to its subject, which is the Siege of Leningrad, and that's how many days there were. And there's every minute, you might catch one in a minute, there's a metronome sound, you won't hear the sound, but there's a white rose flashes in and out in 1 second. And the metronome represents the Radio Leningrad's broadcast of a metronome the entire time, because everyone knows that when the Nazis take over a city, they go straight to the radio station. And so everyone would know that the city had fallen. And so this is there we go. This is a gradually, slowly moving representation of the Bay of Finland, which is the only escape route, apart from during the winter when they could get across the ice. No one did. It was seriously bad. They thought at one point they'd all get in boats and go across the Bay of Finland, but actually they realized, and some did in the end, that they'd be bombed by Stukas. I'm going to leave you with one last flower, because it's, for me, perhaps the most interesting of all. The Tunisian Revolution was called the Jasmine Revolution, and it was picked up very quickly by the Chinese students after Tiananmen Square, and they decided that that would be their emblem too. And so the Chinese government banned sale of jasmine. They also wanted the shops to tell them if anyone asked for it, and then they banned the flower, the name of the flower. They disappeared the name jasmine. And so what I've done is, that was an early painting, that's on concrete. This is the last slide. I decided to avoid the word jasmine by painting the background only. So the bottom one is a piece of wood with gesso surrounding the word jasmine in Chinese. And the top one's in red. I think that's it. Let me just think of anything I missed telling you. I'm looking forward to questions, of course. I think that's it. I'd like to thank Paul for the show. It's a lovely space, and I'm so honored to be in this gallery. I'm sure you will have questions.
Any questions?
Yeah. You use some very heavy material at times. Steel, concrete, copper.
Yes.
This would make a very heavy piece to hang on my wall. Is that?
Paul said about Paul always complains that my stuff.
It's a running joke. He always tries, I always think he's trying to make something as heavy as it can possibly be. His last exhibition, we had a big cross. And it took 4 of us basically to lift. It was still heavy. So this is something that goes along with him. But he sits one. The concrete it's a
Like a paste.
like a paste, yeah. It's not that heavy.
So I can tell you that these days there are mechanisms for screwing into drywall, just half-inch drywall. I'm an architect, so I know this. Then you can support any of these pieces. There's nothing to it. What happens is that the plastic goes through and expands on the other side, which holds it, and then the screw goes into the plastic that's expanded. And believe me, there is nothing here that's made that 1 here is too big. But things like this, yeah. Yeah. So,
All in your pricing, do you charge by the pound?
yeah, I had a whole phase of being into conceptual minimalism, and I drove full crazy.
Here's one more. The one behind it, that long one, I just want to make a mention. That was purchased, and it's going to be going to a very major Canadian museum, which is really nice for it to be going into a collection. It's going to, not right away, it's going to be donors' home for a little while. Just mention that it's really going into a really important collection. It's really nice.
Thank you. And another one's already hanging in a wall, on a wall in one of the four roses.
I'm Are you painting over photographic images in some places?
Not here, no, none. They're all painted with, I have a photograph somewhere. I take a photograph, sometimes myself, and other times I'm having to glean something from the internet. And then it's right there, and I'm painting it.
Oh,
So I'm not.
So the black.
Yeah, none of them are over photographs. Actually, someone, a really close friend, said after the opening, "How does he get all this printed?" And my wife said, "They're all oil painted." She said. So they're paints.
Could you make that cost as well?
Which one do you put?
Oh, with the four roses.
Yes, I mean actually we have the series of 5 of those, this series of 5 of the square light-offs, but that could be light-offs, absolutely. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. That'd be great. Yeah, great.
Tony, I'll offer you a different, a wrong or misguided read, but often those are interesting.
Yeah.
When I came to your opening, I came in, that didn't read blurb or anything, came in, and I dropped the references to your previous work.
Oh,
You know, if we followed your art practice and your architectural practice,
interesting.
the folded copper, the steel plates, etc. So there's a meta element to this, right?
Yeah, interesting.
And then I saw the flowers. And then I said, well, what is the commentary of this palette from your practice, artistic and architectural, juxtaposed with flowers? So there's tension, and the tension is evident, and it's in most of the compositions, between either the geometric framing or the materiality versus the flower. Now I asked myself, what does this mean? I said, well, Tony's clearly struggling, because I think as architects know that the aim of beauty is hard to pull off. And you don't often get very far with arguments solely based on beauty of one's clients. So you have to deal with materiality, with folded metal, with concrete, etc. And then beauty happens as almost incidental. So I said, well, that's the struggle. This is Tony's practice. He's struggling between the facts of his art and architecture practice and the beauty that is in flowers, etc. So I love that struggle. And I didn't know anything about the political subject. You see what I mean? And I'm not sure if that political argument is all that necessary, because I think my reading might be as interesting or more so for those who know you and the other things you do. Might be more interesting than coming up with all the revolutionary thoughts.
Yeah, very, interesting. I mean, definitely, I'm an architect through and through. I love hot rolled steel. I have hot rolled steel in every house I've done, and in the show, and it's a lovely material. It's very real, and it comes out of the factory. It's not meant to be on a wall. It's used for axles and things. It's a very different thing. But that's interesting. Sorry.
I was just going to make a comment further to what you were saying. Very interestingly, most people are looking at the show without reading. Without reading the stuff on the wall first. And then they'll ask questions and they'll say, well, just read. That's a certain kind of explanation. But most people are coming at it from that perspective. Whereas a lot of the time you go into a gallery and you'll see people spending more time reading the card than looking at the art. In this case, it's quite different.
Sorry, I don't know if you're still looking for more political roses, but I did some free associating while you were speaking, and when you showed that early photograph of the fist as what you imagined as a symbol of resistance, it made me think about the French socialist movement in 1981. Their emblem was a fist, just like the one you showed, holding a rose. That was when François Mitterrand was elected president. And they took a popular song from 1967 by Gilbert Bécaud, which was a kind of popular sad love song, which is L'important c'est la rose. And it's a kind of sweet song. And that became their song for the French Socialist Party. So this is 1981. If you want to look it up, because it was the fist holding the rose, and you saw it everywhere. Yeah.
That's great. One of them I didn't mention was the lily of the valley, and the fact that it had been the rose was the emblem for the Labour movement. In fact, May Day started with a rose, and the government figured that it was too left-wing, so they decided to go to the lily of the valley, which was actually from a 1561 date when a king was given lily of the valley and loved the idea and started giving lily of the valley to everyone. So there's a history to that. In 1942, I think it was, this started with the rose. It was the Labour movement.
Just in response to what you said about converting arts, one of the things that I find really interesting is your narrative of starting political. Because it led to a surprise for me. Like the surprise didn't come from the politics, but the pairing of particular flower with particular elements are two elements that I would never have come up with, and you surprised us. So I don't think it's a matter of preferring one or the other. Your narrative is right on, but it's really interesting to hear.
You talk about the element being the steel, for instance. You mean that element?
I mean, yes,
the medium,
the hard elements that are credited towards the movements that you're progressive movements and beauty of the flower.
And this is obviously an ongoing thing, but I'm still surprised at the first flower I showed was the Dutch daisy. I didn't mention it, but towards the end of the war they were using that as their symbol. And I mean, I went through the 60s, peace and love, and I know what flowers meant then, but I realized that it was probably also meaning the strength of peace. These flowers were peaceful and not aggressive, not the fist.
I just saw Jay Salim just got back from Palestine, and one of the things that he remarked on was this extraordinary cactus flower, which really, really grows in impossible situations. which for him came to symbolize people that he kept there. So it goes on.
It also occurred to me that in terms of PR, it's amazing to have a symbol. And, you know, it's interesting that we don't have an anti-Trump's flower as symbol. It's probably we're all in such shock that we haven't thought of it yet.
I was believing that struck me too, was the fragility of the flower, but at the same time, I also think of resilience, like it will bloom. You know, and all the images of the flowers coming up through the cracks, which war zones and so forth.
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah.
you can't keep it down.
Yeah, yeah. And how a flower, a bloom is, it repeats. It's not just one flower gone. Yeah.
One thing that Tony and I have both been observing is the number of flower shows there are all around the world right now. It seems to be something that's just going up.
You know,
And it's so interesting. One of the things, of course, artists they are tapped into the collective consciousness without necessarily referencing each other or what's going on. Things just happen. And that's consistent throughout art history. But right now is the time, if you look, you'll see so many different flower shows or shows of flowers by artists all over the world and from different perspectives. We keep saying, oh, to see this at Tony's.
you know, I want to say something to that. But, I had this show in my mind a year and a half ago, and my family things happened, and I had to go to London a lot, and so on. So I didn't start, but I had this in my mind. And it was so frustrating. I went to Deer Beacon and saw Steve McQueen's flower show, like you could go to, and Monty Clark locally, and it was endless, the calls, right? So many flower shows. The only nice thing for me is that none of them seem to have any meaning. They're pretty, you know, they're very nice. None of them had a narrative. So I felt what Kay brings in, but it was almost, seems like after. There's so many shows, major galleries in the world that have flowers on them.
Any other questions or comments? Well, we're going to strike the chairs very quickly, so please stay back, enjoy the exhibition. Opportunity to talk amongst each other, lots of artists to talk to here, and to buy a catalog, and maybe a painting. Please stay back. There's wonderful ginger tea. And I just want to point one thing out. For those who don't know, Tony referenced our Saturday Evening Post. It comes out every Saturday. Then I was sort of down low as far as acknowledging that. But I want to acknowledge Diamond. Diamond is the writer. Diamond is an incredibly gifted writer. And interesting, when she came from Beijing at 11 years old, she immigrated to New York without one word of English. And here she is writing. It blows my mind every week. That's just something we get asked to embrace. So that's fine. Anyway, please stay on.